Welcome back here from Tokyo, and wanted to do yet another presentation. I think it's my third for the day, but this one's specifically on TOK. And the beauty of this was, now that we have established all of the TOK terminology, they had to put together a mini presentation. Now my class is small, I only have 3 students, but the advantage is to put them into different roles each class, and then they had to put together a 10-minute presentation. 10-minute presentation is pretty much the standard of what an individual is going to have to do when they do their presentation. But without further ado, I kind of want to show how this plan worked out and why I really enjoy doing it with the students. So let's get rid of this here and get right to it. So the plan for the mini presentation was something that I got from a colleague, but what I did was I modified it a little bit because I wanted them to work specifically on the TOK terminology. So what do you see? What you see right here is the steps checklist that they have to do in order to meet the summative assessment. The formative assessment, which later they're going to have to do in a summative assessment. So I'm highlighting it on the screen. The first thing they're going to do is the RLS. Now, for those who teach TOK, the real life situation, what it is something that's happening. There are about 6 criteria, which I don't want to go into. That's going to be in a video before where I talk about the real life situation, how to teach that. By now they know what it is, and they can identify. What I tell them to do is to pick at least 4 of the criteria that make an RLS is an acceptable RLS. So I'm going to show 2 presentations, but for the RLS part, they have to describe it, give some background knowledge, why it's an RLS, and something that will help the listener, the audience, understand why it would constitute an RLS. So that being said, number 2, the knowledge claims. Knowledge claims, there could be personal knowledge claims, which is going to fit into the personal knowledge, or the shared knowledge claims, which could be research-based. It could be justification. I call it the PK, SK, justifying what are the claims made according to the research or according to the people reporting about the RLS. Now I'm going pretty fast here, but for those of us that know the TOK terminology, the knowledge claims part have to be specified, and why I make them talk about why it's a claim and what it tells us about the RLS. Okay. Again, we're just using the TOK language to talk about the RLS. So the number 4 that I have here, the WOKs. For this mini presentation, I mix it up. Sometimes I'll give them a WOK, sometimes I'll give them multiple WOKs. For this one, I ended up giving them, I believe, a couple AOKs. For those of the WOK, AOK, ways of knowing, the areas of knowledge that will help them put together the presentation. You have the personal and shared knowledge, which they're based on the RLS, they'll have to come up with on their own. And they can base that from the knowledge claims, but need an explanation in order to convince the audience that they understand the TOK concept of personal versus shared knowledge, okay? Form a knowledge question, one of the hardest parts to the presentation. And what I included, which was not part of the assignment that I did, but I think is really important to get them ready for their presentation, a claim versus a counterclaim. The claim is what is the opportunity to look at or answer the knowledge question provided with evidence related to TOK. The counterclaim is going to be acknowledgement of the other side, recognizing that there is another side to the argument, evidence for that, but then coming back to number 8, which is the conclusion. Okay, and then what I did in addition to the conclusion, which is a defense using TOK language, is connect it to another RLS, another real life situation that would be that relates to their knowledge question, but isn't necessarily similar to the RLS. So what I did was I chose 2 presentations, and as you see here for the review, we'll get to the presentations in a minute. What I recommend, this format I think worked exceptionally well. We did it for about 3 weeks, 2 class periods a week, 6 times total. And I will tell you, now that we have finished and we're about to proceed into the writing, they understand the TOK concepts quite well. So I'm very impressed where we're at least in terms of them presenting. Right now it's October, they're going to be presenting sometime in February. So we're going to take a break, look at the writing, present later. But anyway, looking at numbers 1 through 3, I have them create a slide presentation. So that 10-minute presentation is broken down into 3 minutes. Each class period, they had to rotate. So for example, one student responsible, I have only a class of 3. So if depending on the class you have, if you can break them up into groups, I would recommend no bigger than 3. 3 I think is good. They need to be comfortable, have practice speaking for a duration of time. The 10 minutes is quite long for some high schoolers, but I think it's good to get them into the different roles in the TOK process so that when they do the whole presentation, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident. So I have here for the first part, whoever is responsible for number 1, they're going to be doing the RLS and 2 and 3 from above. The 2 and 3 from above, they're going to have to do the, explain the RLS, and they're going to have to do the knowledge claims. So that's how I broke that task up. 4 and 5 from above, once the other student is going to be responsible for the WOKs, which I talked about, connected to the AOKs, and then the personal and shared knowledge explanation. And the last is the 7 and 8, which one student is going to be responsible for the conclusion, and another student, the same student responsible for the claim, knowledge claim, and the conclusion. And what they will do is each class they'll rotate. So if one student did 7 and 8, now that student for the next class is going to be 1, 2, and 3. Okay, this rotation I think is extremely necessary. It gets them practicing. When I provide the feedback after they give their presentation, it helps the next student who's going to be in that role think, okay, this is maybe a challenge that was expressed by the teacher. Now I know what not to do or what to do in the next presentation. So this was the assignment. I had done it for about 3 weeks, as I mentioned, 6 times total. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of look at 2 presentations. 1 out of the 6, I had them as a group decide to me the presentation that they felt they did the strongest on. And then I had one that they thought that they did okay on. And I wanted to show both in this presentation for purposes of 1, seeing what a sample presentation looks like, and 2, in terms of those who are teaching TOK, how to go about teaching it, how to go about making improvements. Maybe as we go through this presentation, I'm getting these presentations for the first time actually, so I'm not gonna go through the whole presentation, but we see the topic here, genetic engineering and ethics. Forgive me, they had to come up with their own title for this. The RLS explained in a page. You see it's kind of short, but what I wanted them to do was to make it short intentionally so that they could focus looking at me. I don't want my students reading off a screen so much as I want them feeling comfortable being able to present to an audience. So here I'm having it on the screen. You can feel free to pause the video to take a look at it, but I'm going to kind of glance over to kind of look at some knowledge claims, which is the next part. Again, you can pause it and take a look at it. I'm going to kind of stop at each slide and talk a bit about it. This was based on a film, the genetic engineering, and they had to do some outside research because they weren't really sure much about genetic engineering, even though I picked the topic. But nonetheless, these were 2 knowledge claims and their knowledge questions. What extent does reason play a role in ethics? We have spent about a couple weeks coming up with knowledge questions. This they came together on. When they do their individual presentation, they'll obviously have to do it on their own, but here we have the knowledge question. They had to come up with a slide, not bulleted, but intentional. I wanted, and I still want them, to talk about the AOK and WOK, why it fits into not only RLS, but how it relates to the knowledge question. Okay, using that TOK language, which is necessary. An explanation of the shared knowledge versus personal knowledge. You see on the screen here. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time, but going over this. Okay, the claim. Again, this is kind of answering. This is answering their knowledge question, making a claim, but now we have a knowledge claim, or and now we have a counterclaim, which is, again, acknowledging the other side of the argument, which for TOK purposes is necessary because they want them to be thinking not just about what their conclusion or answer to their claim is going to be, but acknowledging the other side of the argument. So again, you can pause the video, take a look at these, and the conclusion. Now, unbeknownst to me, they came up with this visual model. At least they added it to their presentation, which I think is going to be important when you guys instruct your students to do their presentation. Again, you can pause it, take a look at it, the conclusion. But I think the strongest point of this is looking at the other RLS, designer babies. Again, related to genetic engineering, okay, a bit, but they in their RLS, they also, apart from the DNA, specifically, they talked about plants and GMOs, and now we're talking about designer babies. So you see the connection, they both relate to the knowledge question. And this is one they felt they did okay on. And the reason why they felt they did okay was they had to rely a lot on the screen. They had a lot of notes and note cards that they had to rely on. And I didn't dock them terribly for that, but I do want my students at a point where not the entire presentation, but a simple glance at the screen and then being able to engage the camera when we do film or video these presentations. So this was one on genetic engineering. Again, feel free to stop and pause, take a look at each slide. They did make a video for it, but for purposes of this presentation, I'm not going to play theirs, also for legal reasons. So this is one they actually felt they did pretty well on, taboos. And this one had to do with an instrument from an area in the world where girls specifically are not allowed to play the instrument because of the idea that it will affect their fertility, okay? So something that's taboo. And so it got us discussing about taboos, and sorry, for this presentation, they called it Made with Respect. Again, knowledge claims, they actually were able to cite. This was the one that, by the way, that they felt that they did the best on. That this was the exemplary presentation, and so this is the one I'm showing to you. 4 knowledge claims, all quoted and then explained why it is a claim and how it relates to the RLS. Again, this is the knowledge question they came up with. What ways do indigenous knowledge systems, again, a little bit of an error there, affect one's intuition? So based on that knowledge question, we have our AOKs and WOKs. This a little bit in length, different from the other presentation. I recommend bulleting it and making students talk on their feet. How does indigenous knowledge systems, human sciences relate to the knowledge question? How does intuition, faith, reason relate to the knowledge question? How does it relate to the AOKs? How are they interconnected? For those of us that teach TOK, the knowledge framework is really good for this. I taught them that, but I told them not to use, to connect the WOKs with the AOKs, but without using the specific language of the knowledge framework, but to do it on their feet, more thinking analytically and critical about how the TOK language relates. Shared versus personal knowledge, again, you can pause it, take a look at what it says, but being able to discuss how taboos from a personal knowledge perspective is different from the shared. Again, you can pause and take a look at it. We have our claim that attempts to answer the conclusion. We have our counterclaim and another visual diagram. I'm very impressed with the students that they were able to visually come up with something like this and put it in their presentation and explain it. And I think if you can do that for your presentation, I think it's going to be much stronger. It'll show that they're able to make those connections with TOK. The counterclaim continues with another diagram. Again, they felt this one was the one that they did the best on, and I think they did very well on it as well. You have your conclusion, and again, you can pause it, and then another RLS. I highly emphasize the other RLS. I made them do this. They were kind of moaning and groaning about, oh, extra work, but you know what? What it does is, in another video that I had seen on YouTube, it showed their extra thinking outside the box, is how the presenter had put it, and it will help give those that are grading the presentation the idea that that the students really know what they're talking about in terms of TOK. So here are 2 presentations. Here is the lesson that I have modified based on the mini presentation that I received. Take a look at it. I had some really good results from this. It's about mid-October, and so we spent about 3 weeks on it, and now we're about ready to engage the writing. So if you can get through at least to the point where they feel comfortable enough to give a presentation discussing all the elements of TOK, I think you're going to be on a good path. So take a look at this video, take a look at the presentation, the lesson, let me know what you think, and hope you can make the best of it. And take care.